Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Against the Stream. Welcome to everyone at home. Anybody here for the first time tonight? Welcome to the regular Monday night Sangha community gathering. I like to start. Anyways, I'm happy to be back. I've been gone for I missed the last 3 Mondays. Happy to be back with the community. I like to start at a big part of my motivation for having a meditation center is to help you build community, help us build community. Yes, it's a place to learn meditation, to learn Buddhism, to practice together, but really to facilitate you meeting other meditators, people practicing Buddhism, and developing those relationships. It's a core tenet of Buddhism to have Sangha, which is the word we translate for as community, as wise friendships, and it's central. It's important part of what we're doing. Not to be done alone. Buddhism is not a solo endeavor. It's a group effort to be practiced in community. So in service of that, I like to ask you to talk to each other before we meditate and give you some kind of prompt. My prompt tonight, I'll give it to you, and then you'll break into small groups, and at home I'll put you in these breakout rooms on Zoom. And the prompt is, how do you see the world? So just think for a moment, like when you think about the world, you look out from your eyeballs at society, at the planet, how do you see it? You know, like you have some immediate, like, well, it's wonderful. What an amazing world we live in. Or like, it's pretty fucked. Look at all of this oppression and ignorance and self-centered, fear-based humanity. How do you see it? So talk to somebody you don't know about how you see the world. You can go into groups of 2 or 3. Don't do big groups so that you get a couple of minutes to talk about, how your mind, how your views, how you see the world. Is it a beautiful, wonderful, why can't we all just get along world? Or is it, what do you see? What kind of discernment? I'm not asking for your judgments, but what kind of like discernment do you see when you look at this world? And at home, I'll throw you into some groups. So go ahead, find some people, talk to each other, get real. We'll talk a bit tonight after the meditation about how the Buddha saw the world and how he encouraged us to relate to the world in a way that ends suffering about the way things are. And I think on some level, the practice of meditation is the inquiry of how do I see myself? So it's so easy to come up with like, oh, I see the world like this. And then we have some sense of like, oh, I see my mind or myself or my body, or see myself like this. And mindfulness in particular is asking us to bring non-judgmental awareness to how our mind works and what we experience in our emotions, our heart, our sensations. Not a judgment of I'm good or I'm bad, but this is the environment that my mind creates. I want to see it clearly. This is the experience that my body, the sensations, the emotions. Non-judgmental, present time, investigative quality of mindfulness, which is to use the mind to inquire what's happening right now. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Sometimes I think people come to meditation with some idea that you're not supposed to think, no thoughts. A good meditation, total stillness, no activity. Where, the Buddha's encouragement is to use the mind to investigate what's happening here. What am I feeling? What is my mind doing? with the ultimate goal of understanding that none of it's all that personal or your fault. That it's just, this is the human condition. This is the human condition where everything is constantly changing, impermanent, unreliable, unsubstantial because of the reality of constant change. And so we're using meditation to see that and to understand. This is the definition of insight or of wisdom, understanding the impermanent, the impersonal, and unsatisfactory or unreliable nature of our own mind, of our own body, of our own self, what we call me, I. How do you see yourself? And all of us lowly, unenlightened beings don't see ourselves clearly. We see ourselves through a lens of delusion, of self-centered confusion. You know, whatever opinion you have of yourself, almost certainly wrong. Almost certainly, because we don't have that awakened ability to see the full truth of who we are and what is unfolding here. And this is why we meditate. Meditation brings us closer and closer to seeing what is true, the Dharma, what is true about this human experience. So we'll meditate together, find a way to sit that's upright, relaxed. As you're ready, allowing your eyes to be closed, making any adjustments necessary to find a posture that feels sustainable, even if you may experience some discomfort. That's okay. Learning to tolerate, have compassion for discomfort. Settling in and softening, releasing, letting go of any unnecessary tension in your face, or shoulders, or chest, or belly, any of those places in your body that get tight with resistance, with holding on or suppressing. Try to soften it, let go, open to the sensations and emotions, thoughts and feelings that are here now. With each exhale, softening into the present time, awareness of the body, sitting, breathing. Letting go of the past and future as we direct our full attention to the present, here. Just this breath as it enters the nostrils. Just this breath as it exits. In order to see the mind clearly, our experience clearly, it's helpful to bring an attitude of friendliness, of kindness. Kind awareness of the body, kind awareness of the mind, whether it's agitated or calm, kind or unkind. Be friendly towards the unkind thoughts rather than adversarial or resisting. Just bring a sense of tenderness, friendliness towards your mind, no matter what it does. Keep it quite simple in the beginning, just anchoring your attention with the breath, the body. Let the thoughts float by in the background. Not trying to stop the mind. Let the mind do whatever it wants. Don't try to control it. But also don't get too involved in the plans, in the hope, the fear, the desires that the mind produces. Just let them be in the background. Reorient to here, sitting, breathing, over and over. What are you paying attention to right now? Is it a thought, a plan? Is it a sensation? Name it. This is just thinking, feeling. Rising and passing of sense impressions in the mind and the body. You can choose to keep it simple with the body, first foundation, or begin to open to investigating the mind, observing the impermanent nature of thought, the process, thoughts appearing, proliferating, and dissolving at some point. The thought ends, perhaps to re-arise. Mindfulness begins to reveal that it's not what's happening that is causing suffering or happiness, but how we are responding, how we're relating to the mind, the body, to pleasure, pain. Mindfulness begins to change our way we see ourselves, how reactive. Begin to respond with more compassion to our own pain by turning towards it. allowing ourselves to feel it. Meet yourself with as much kindness, acceptance, compassion as you can in this moment. And meet this world, each other, with as much kindness, acceptance, and compassion as you can in this moment. The intention to respond with empathy and compassion to the suffering, both internal and external. Spending the last couple of minutes radiating loving kindness in all directions to all living beings, with the simple wish, may all beings be at ease. May all beings be free from suffering, the suffering of greed and hatred and delusion. Extending this wish in all direction to include all sentient beings. Remember to include yourself in the all, not others, but all of us, including this mind, body, heart that you're experiencing right now. May we all do what needs to be done to see clearly and respond wisely to ourselves and to each other. my sense of the Buddha's view of the world is he called this world, this realm that we're experiencing, Samsara, the Buddhist word for planet Earth as we know it, Samsara. Samsara means a realm of perpetually wandering from one form of suffering to the next. Perpetual wandering from one realm of clinging, craving, aversion, anger, resentment, fear, and that we're just in this cycle. The unenlightened reality for us is a lot of dukkha, the first noble truth, suffering, difficulty, and that it can become feels like almost unbearable without learning to respond, depending on your particular life's experiences. And I project mine, but it can at times feel so painful that it's like, how do I even bear this? How do I tolerate my own mind or this world that, you know, my mind suffers about? So here in Samsara, there are three forces, the three, sometimes called the three poisons, the three core causes of unhappiness, of suffering, that make it so challenging to be happy here. And I think they're all just boil down to our survival instinct. Just evolutionary biology has created a situation where we're born into a body that experiences this poison, it's called, of craving. Repetitive, almost constant. Isn't your desire, craving, wanting, seeking mind just almost all day, every day? Your mind saying, you know, this is all right, but it could be better. Even when it's good, the craving is still there. Even when it's like, yeah, this is pretty good, but I could make it better. It should be better, or it should last longer. And that just natural human, samsaric reality of, we call it greed. Maybe when you thought of yourself tonight, I wonder, like, when you thought of the world, I asked you when we started, how do you see the world? Do you see the world as greedy? As a realm of greed, right? With our billionaires and but do you see yourself as greedy? Do you see your cravings as, right? Greed feels like, oh, I don't want to own that. I don't want to take that on, like, oh yeah, I'm constantly experiencing greed for pleasure. Craving sounds a little bit like, oh, okay, I'll take that. Great craving, yeah. Desire, that doesn't sound too bad. But greed feels like this mortal sin, right? It's like, oh no, I don't want to acknowledge that my own mind and body are lusting and greeding for pleasure all the time. And that it's not intentional. You didn't, it's like, no, we didn't wake up in the morning and be like, I'm going to just experience greed for pleasure all day today. That's what I'm going to do. It's not like we made a decision at some point in our life of like, I'm going to be a self-centered, greedy, craving machine. It's just, the Buddha, it's just the way it is. It's not your, and I love this part of Buddhism, and I'm always saying it, reminding us that greed and hatred and delusion is what's happening here in samsara, and not just out there. It's not just the greedy billionaires or the oppressors it's not just them that is the greed, hate. It's here in us, in all of us. It's part of humanity. I'm going to go do a little tangent aside. Just got back from traveling went to Bali in Indonesia. And I love getting out of the United States. And I try in my life, I've been really fortunate, privileged to get to travel quite a bit. And because I can kind of sometimes get a little bogged down into America's the problem. Like, what a fucked society we live in. But then it's so good to go to other places, and especially like when I've gone to Buddhist countries. And I can remember the first time I went to the Buddhist countries, and when I was in my 20s, and with this idea of they know the truth. Like, we're fucked because Christianity, that's the problem, capitalism, Christianity, that's the problem. Then going to a Buddhist country and being like, they have the Dharma, there's monks everywhere, they have the Dharma, and seeing oh wow, they're just as fucked as us, even worse in some ways. It's a little bit more progressive equality in some ways in the States than there are in a lot of the other societies. And so for me, I always feel like it's so good to get out and wake up to this isn't a national issue. It's a human issue. And this is the Buddha's teaching that this isn't about India. And he said a lot of things about India because that was his culture. And it was a racist, sexist, homophobic, greed-based culture, just like ours. So he said a lot of things about but he was just talking about humanity. That this is the human condition, and humans create this in every society. And worse in some than others, and more exaggerated sexism, or more exaggerated racism, or more exaggerated greed, capitalism on steroids, But every time you get a bunch of humans together, they're gonna fuck it up. They're gonna create a government, and they're gonna create corruption, they're gonna create religion. Oh God, religion, such a problem on this planet, including Buddhism, such a problem. So much ignorance in the name of hierarchical power of religion. So much greed, so much attachment to views, and I'm right, you're wrong. Even in Buddhism, and Buddhist sects arguing with each other for centuries now about who understands emptiness the best. My understanding of the impersonal nature of things is way better than your understanding of the impersonal nature of things. So that dilemma that we're in, where we're born into this world and we look around and experience all of the craving, repetitive, second noble truth, repetitive craving for sense pleasures. And it's not, pleasure's not the problem. Pain's not actually the problem. It's the truth that everything's impermanent, and that it's the repetitive clinging. And there's this beautiful proposal, Buddha, you know, I love the way the Buddha lays it out. And he's like, yep, there's all this suffering, and you're in this realm of greed and hatred and delusion. And you're experiencing this repetitive experience of clinging and craving and aversion. And it's not your fault, but it's the way it is. And there's an intervention. And you can do something about it. It's possible. You're not just fucked, right? What a bummer that would be. Of being like, yeah, it's just a realm of greed, hatred, and delusion. No solution. You're fucked. I feel like one of the reasons that I was so drawn to Buddhism is because my kind of rebellious punk rock ethics were like, yeah, I get the greed, hatred, delusion. I see the world as fucked. And it wasn't until I came to the Dharma that I was like, oh, and there's a solution. Not just pointing out the problem. The punks are right. But they very rarely get around to, we can do something from the inside, not just out there, the greedy, eat the rich attitude. Not just them, but this is in me. And from the inside out, I can free myself from greed, from hatred, from delusion. There's a solution. Third noble truth. It's possible in this lifetime through our own effort to train the mind so thoroughly that we are no longer reacting with the clinging, the craving, the self-centered, I, me, mine, delusional, seeing ourselves through this confused lens, seeing the world through this, and that this simple mindfulness practice, present time awareness, turn towards, stop running, sit still, shut up, and look at your own mind. And the look at your own mind is really important. How often are we using meditation to just ignore our minds all of the time? There's a whole term that mostly the Western teachers have come up with of spiritual bypassing. Rather than using the Dharma as the Buddha taught it, which is turn towards, see clearly, using meditation to turn away from, to ignore, to bypass the causes of suffering rather than sitting in them and turning towards them and learning to be with our pain rather than using meditation as another way to crave avoidance. I just want to feel good. I want to meditate this shit away. I didn't come here to suffer. I came here to avoid that shit. But the way that the Buddha lays it out is the way to end suffering is by turning towards it, being with it, facing it, seeing it's the clinging, it's the craving, it's not what's happening. It's how we're responding to what's happening. And the untrained mind doesn't have much ability to be compassionate towards our own pain, or really the pain of others. And that's why we meditate. We have to train the mind. That term the Buddha calls, first he kind of disparagingly talks about himself. He says, when I was just a lowly, unenlightened bodhisattva, and, before I knew, when I was just seeking this term bodhisattva, clinging to views and opinions. And he says, these untrained worldlings, people who are not awakened, haven't thoroughly trained their mind. Worldling meaning seeking our happiness from material and sensual source. Keeping the world as hostage. If I only had the right relationship, if I only had enough money, if I only had enough, whatever it is, external source, then I'd be happy. That's so you can have the humility to be like, yep, I'm a worldling. I still think that way. I still think that there's got to be some material solution to my happiness. He said, and that is just a lack of having trained our minds thoroughly enough to totally understand that it's just not the case. I often reflect on the blessing it is to have gotten everything you wanted. I don't know if any of you are there. Occasionally, I have some students that come through and say, I got everything I wanted, and it didn't fucking work. If you haven't gotten everything you wanted yet, it's easy to stay in that delusion of like, yeah, but I'd be happy if I got everything I wanted. I'm convinced that I would, it worked for me. So it's I hope you get everything you want so that you can see that it won't work. So that you can wake up to, there's no material, sensual, external solution to this human condition. No, you don't have to waste, we don't have to waste our lives chasing, something that's not going to work. There's a part of you that knows that that's true. Hopefully, I hope there's a part of you that you hear that and you're like, even though my mind tells me differently, there's some part of my heart that knows that that's true. That there's not an external, material, sensual source of sustainable well-being. And that's why we're meditating. That's why we're looking for an internal transformation, not an external goal. That having been said, I was asked a question a few months ago about like, well, what do we do about our ambition and our goals and our, and my sense, my experience is go for it. Go for your goals and your ambition and your career and your relationships, like go for all of it with the wisdom that it's not going to work, but do it anyways. 100%, get the job, to have the relationship, do all of it with the internal knowing that it's not a reliable refuge. It's just a job. And relationship can be incredibly healing and, an opportunity for probably more growth than anything. But the idea that like a relationship's gonna just make you happy. Your mind, all of our minds tell us that, right? Like, if I was just in love with the right person and they were in love with me. A lot of work, a lot of healing, a lot of suffering to be done in even the healthiest relationships. So the Buddha sees the world as samsara, greed, hatred, delusion. Not only that, but that is the strongest current, the stream. And so like when you think of mainstream, like, our Sangha tends to be a little like counterculture, alternative, But when you think of mainstream, the world, mainstream America, greed, hatred, delusion, corporate, political, greed and ignorance. And again, not just America, Indonesia, Thailand, India, Africa, everywhere. It's not just us. And he uses the term, said in this world of human greed and hatred and delusion, we have to go against the stream. Patiso Tagami is the Pali, the Buddhist word that translates as either against the current, the strongest current, the current that causes suffering for us is the clinging, the aversion, this biology of self-centeredness. Your mind thinks about itself most of the time, and it's not your fault. It's just what the human mind does. It creates a sense of self, sense of permanent I, me, mine, and ego self. And he says the nirvana, freedom, awakening, true sense of ease and well-being is by going against the greed, against the hatred, against the self-centeredness. And we have these tools, and it's not just like, yeah, go. It's here is the eightfold path. Here is the importance of community. I was thinking about the stream as this analogy, and the Buddha saying like, okay, go against the stream, and us being like, well, how the fuck do I do that? And he says, well, first you need a vehicle, a boat, and on some level, I feel like the Sangha is the boat. We need like together. We get together. You need that critical mass to be in the stream together. And that's part of the vehicle is us together. You don't do it all by yourself. We get together. And then, but again, like if we were just together and we didn't have the meditation instructions and the precepts, the renunciation and the meditation instructions, we'd still just be a mess. Together floating downstream. Like how many times have you been part of communities that didn't have a lot of tools? It's freezing in here. We can turn the AC off. Would you do it, Charlie? Yeah. I see people bundling up. I run hot, but I'm getting cold too. So thinking of the Sangha as this sort of raft. Maybe it's the Dharma, the teachings that are traditionally thought of as the raft, but that's I don't know, for me, community seems so much of like what allows me to continue to show up and connect and make some incremental progress up against the stream, upstream. And then the meditative training, I was thinking of like, we have two main paddles. Like, okay, you got to go upstream and you've got the container. And one paddle is mindfulness, is wisdom. Mindfulness leads to wisdom. And maybe I tend to think that on some level, maybe mindfulness is enough. If you truly are mindful of your pain and you use mindfulness not as a bypass, but as turning towards, it will lead to compassion. Mindfulness will lead to compassion. Mindfulness will lead to non-attachment and a sense of appreciation, appreciative joy. Mindfulness will lead to loving kindness and to equanimity. So on some level, you could go, like, what is that, like a canoe where you just have one paddle? I don't know. Kayak? I don't know. Kayak. Okay. Trying to use some boating analogies I'm not really familiar with. When we were in Bali, we went rafting and we all had a paddle. And I've been rafting a couple times where there's just the one person with the two paddles. But it's so much better when you like have people paddling on both sides of the boat. And so my sense is like you can make mindfulness work all by itself. And if you look at the Eightfold Path, the Buddha says, here's understand the way it is. Make sure that your intentions are in line with non-harming, with, your actions are Practice some renunciation, careful with your karma, your speech, your actions, your livelihood. And he says, here's the meditation instructions, and it's mindfulness. Mindfulness and concentration, sati, and the panya, the wisdom that will come from present time, non-judgmental, investigative awareness that will lead to kindness. And then later in the Buddha's, that was all he put in the Eightfold Path. And then as he started teaching, loving kindness as a meditation, forgiveness, compassion. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can get there with one oar, but actually if you have two paddles, way better. And so I see the heart practices, the practice of forgiveness, the practice of compassion, of loving kindness, of training the mind to be kind rather than just observing it, actually creating the neural pathways of kindness as a very important tool in going against the greed and hatred and delusion of this human condition and of this world. So the Buddha's encouragement and the tools that were offered, we have it, it's all here. My experience is, I was once asked, is anything missing from Buddhism for you? That's an interesting thing to think about. Some people say, yeah, maybe a little bit more sense of the divine, or, like whatever it is for you. Some people feel like, oh, it's a little too rational or something. I could use a little more mystical in my spiritual path, or sacred feminine, and I'd like more sacred feminine, something like, what's missing for you? All I could come up with, and this was a long time ago, 20-something years ago, was the only thing that I could come up with was that I feel like there's not enough in the explicit teachings about the importance of having a sense of humor. Having a fucking sense of humor about this task and this existence and this, it's so easy when you're suffering a lot to get way too, and when you're trying to be spiritual, to get way too serious. And finding that balance of like, yeah, I want to take this very seriously, and let's also laugh at ourselves a bit. Let's lighten up a little bit. Don't get too tied down to being identified with, I'm so spiritual. Fart jokes are funny. What's that saying of like, it's not funny if you don't have a sense of humor, it's not funny. Something like that. But I felt like when I looked at Buddhism, that was it. More humor. Everything else feels like it's right there. And some scholars who know the suttas really well, I think Juan, you and I maybe talked about this at some point, say, there's a whole bunch of places if you read the suttas where the Buddha is sort of making jokes. It's not, he never says, have a sense of humor, but where he's kind of, being a little, using analogies that are funny. That I find it so thick, the scriptures and the archaic language that they're translated into, that I don't find them funny at all. But I guess it's in there somewhere. So we're here on this process together, and the Sangha as a container, as a boat, as a vehicle. And we have the teachings, and we have the mindfulness practice, and you have to do it all yourself. We all have to do our own meditation practice. Nobody can do it for us. We can't do it. And you have these paddles. And the thing about like being, on a river and trying to go against the stream, against the current, is it's going to take a lot of effort. And it's, like the paddling you did yesterday isn't going to make any progress for you today. right? It's a kind of like sustainable, constant, like, yep, gotta keep pedaling, keep mindfulness right now, forgiveness again and again and again. And it's a effort, a sustainable effort that has to become our lives, not just something we do on Monday nights, not just something that we occasionally go and do on a retreat, but that becomes the way that we see the world through the more and more lens of compassion, the intention to be kind, to be generous, to be loving, to be present, to take full responsibility for our reactions, and to really understand this core of the philosophy, which is that happiness and unhappiness is not created by what's happening. It's created by how we're responding to what's happening. And that's a high teaching, high goal. It's a lot of responsibility. I think that there's some humility necessary, especially in early stages of practice, in all stages, but where, you know, the idea that like, oh, I could just be non-reactive and therefore not suffer in this situation, although it's true, we can't fucking do it yet, and that's the reality. Yes, if I had compassion for all living beings, I wouldn't be suffering, but I don't yet. If I, didn't believe that my mind was right most of the time, I wouldn't suffer so much. But I do believe that my mind is right most of the time. So I create all kinds of suffering for myself. I'm not there yet, that humility to say like, yep, the Dharma resonates. I want to be there. I want to be as free as I can be. And I'm not there yet. I don't have perfect, non-reactive, compassionate response yet, but I'm going to keep meditating because I want to get there. I want to get closer and closer to having the ability to, no matter what happens in my mind or in the world, respond wisely to it, not suffer at it. And my experience is that it works slowly, gradually. We get better at it. We develop the skill. We uncover the wisdom, however you want to talk about it. Against the stream, Sangha is the boat. Mindfulness is a paddle. Heart practices are a paddle. The 5 precepts, the renunciation, I don't know, let's make it the rudder. I don't know, something. It's also a necessary part of the vehicle, of the boat. We need some level of renunciation about how we speak and how we behave. There's the analogy that somebody used that I used to attribute to the Buddha, but I don't think it's in the suttas. And they said, there are people who are really good meditators, meditate their ass off, sit there for hours, perfect posture, fucking beautiful meditator, but they're not very ethical. And that trying to get to liberation without an ethical, karmic, way of being is like trying to go, upstream while you're still tied to the dock. You can meditate all day, every day, but if you're still lying and cheating and stealing, you're not going to get free. So the behavior renunciation in conjunction with the wisdom and compassion that come from the formal meditation practice. So we have a few minutes if there's questions, comments, anything specific about, so one of those general paths, general teachings about the path, and about normalizing that if you see this world as quite confused, you're not wrong. You know, from the Buddhist perspective, this is a very confused world, and that's normal, and that being human is fucking confusing, and that we have these practices to clear away the confusion. Please.
My name's Nina.
Nice to see you.
Just in the spirit of renunciation, in comparison to other programs or religions or practices, how have you found Buddhism helpful in leaning into the idea of from this moment forward, rather than this repentance that is practiced in the alternative?
I like the question. Let me see if I can repeat it for the people at home that might not have been able to hear it. The question is, how is Buddhism, in the spirit of renunciation, handle the kind of unskillfulness or suffering of the past, maybe in a different way than some of the, other traditions, Judeo-Christian, Islamic, whatever, where there's some sort of repentance and like guilt. And does, maybe not completely, but is there some of that in Buddhism, or how does Buddhism?
How would you apply Buddhism to
Yeah.
a concept like that, to like kind of remove the guilt and lean into from this moment forward?
Yeah. There's so much of mindfulness is this moment. So in the practice itself, there's a lot of let go of the past, be here now, as they say, as the dude said, be here now, let go of the past. But you can't stop your mind from reflecting and feeling the guilt or shame, or, there's no encouragement in Buddhism to beat yourself up about the past, but there is an acknowledgement that your mind's going to do that some. And when it does it, have compassion for that confused mind state. See it as a painful mind state. Don't feed it. There's no, but there's a kind of a realistic view that, like, of course, your mind's going to give you a hard time about the past. It's going to rehash it. So present time awareness is a tool to cut through. Don't spend too much time back there. But I also feel like compassion and forgiveness is a way to help us process and maybe even resolve some of the past stuff. And, the process of forgiving ourselves and forgiving others, which takes so much of the fuel out of the mind's tendency to live in the regret. But there is some level in Buddhism of a healthy sense of regret for when we have caused harm. We don't want to bypass the feelings of regret that we have by saying here and forward only, and the past is gone. That's not me, actually processing it. Those are thoughts and feelings, and they're here. So to meet them with forgiveness, to meet them with compassion, to meet ourselves and others from the past with compassion, that helps resolve and helps take the fuel out of that. Because my experience is that when I try to ignore the pain of the past, it keeps fucking knocking on the door. And I can just, here. But when I actually say, okay, come, all right, come in guilt and shame and loathsomeness and, self-recrimination and whatever, like, let's sit together. Let's let it in. The Tibetans talk about, our demons, the dragons of the demons in our life. You can keep shutting the door on them and trying to bypass them, or at some point you just have to say, invite the demons in for tea, which is always the past, at some level, the pain that we've experienced or the fear. So Buddhism, yes, here, now. But sometimes what's here right now is a whole bunch of grief that's from past experience, and it's here now. Or a whole bunch of guilt that's from the past, and it's here now, and it's calling for some compassion and forgiveness as much as we can in this moment. And move forward, and there's some saying about karma. I think I'm going to botch it, but there's some saying about karma that's something like, you want to understand the karma of your past, look at your present experience. And if you want to look into the future and know what you're moving forward, your future is going to be like, look at your present actions. Because it's how we are responding now that is going to create our future sense of present here and now sense of well-being, but also karmic momentum to more freedom. Does that mostly, address it? Don't completely shut the door on the past, but don't wallow in it, and don't, forgiveness is a core part of our practice. And it doesn't take long meditating to see, like, I can't stop my mind from dredging up the shit from the past. I can't stop my mind from planning. I can choose how I relate to those thoughts when they arise, and I'm aware of them, but I can't control the mind and just be like, past, you're dead to me. Good luck with that. It's going to keep coming back and, turn into a demon until it's an interesting practice that Soltram Alione does. She's a female Western Lama called Feeding Your Demons, where you visualize that stuff. So, and it's almost always from the past. And you turn it into this demon, and then you feed it the nectar of your own being, and you offer. It's a really interesting surrender to it, and it can take all of the power out of it and be a real sort of trauma resolution meditation. Quite interesting. Yeah, difficult. We did a couple retreats together where we were doing like refuge recovery and feeding your demons, and it can really stir people up a lot, but it also can be really beneficial. Please, Eric.
I'm Eric. You mentioned that different sects in Buddhism. I'd imagine they're all from the same trunk, just branched out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, is any of those sects or any form of Buddhism believe in a higher power? And if that's not the case, can you explain why? You understand that?
Yeah. The answer is yes. And I would actually say that my sense of OG Siddhartha Gautama early Buddhism is that it's pretty non-theistic. And it's not that he doesn't believe in higher powers. He talks about angels and higher powers, and there's even this sort of one of the gods that comes to him to convince him to teach. So there is some of that in the Theravada, but there's a core sense of like they're there, the higher powers are there, but they're also part of samsara, and the higher powers are also suffering. And sometimes the Buddha is called the teacher of gods and humans and humans, because there's all these stories about like he has to go and like teach the gods about compassion, because like the Western gods that are wrathful and jealous, I'm a wrathful and jealous God. He's like, God, you don't need to suffer either. You don't need to be wrathful and jealous and attached and fucking smiting people and shit. Like, be loving, be non-attached, God. So there are some of those, but there's a kind of my sense is that there's a skepticism about the God's abilities to really intervene in human happiness. He puts so much more emphasis on it. He's like, yeah, maybe they're there, but really, you got to do your own non-attachment. The gods got their own problems. They're not going to do it for you. And coming from that Hindu polytheistic, not just one creator God that's the God of love or the God of smiting or whatever, but all of there's Vishnu and there's Krishna and there's Hanuman and there's all of these, polytheistic gods. And they're around. And, but he kind of has a much more humanist perspective. So that's one piece. I know I'm going over, I'll end in a minute. The other piece is that as Buddhism has developed, I would say actually most Buddhists treat the Buddha like a god, like their higher power. And they're praying to Buddha and have turned him into a higher power. And then there's certain sects of Buddhism, like what's the sect one where they believe that there's a Tushita heaven. It's not the Tibetans, but the form of like Chinese, Japanese Buddhism, where they actually Amitabha.
Oh yeah, that eventually became Pure Land.
Pure Land Buddhism. Pure Land Buddhism that really feels like there is a kind of Buddha God that will kind of come back, and there'll be like a second coming, and Maitreya Buddha will come, and then we'll all get enlightened because the Buddha is going to, very sort of like second coming of Christ kind of perspective, but Buddhist.
Have the Pure Land is almost.
It's like a heaven.
Kind of heaven, that particular school.
Yeah. And so it's very, and like the folks that chant the Sogo SGI, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, like that you will get blessings, like your prayers, your chants will be answered. So in Buddhism, there's Buddhist theism. I was one time wearing my Buddhist atheist shirt, and this young Asian woman who'd grown up Buddhist was really offended. She's like, Buddhism's not atheist. My family and my parents, like, we pray to the Buddhas and, the Buddhist gods, and we're not atheists. We're Buddhist theists. So for sure in Buddhism, there is a sense of that. And my sense of early Buddhism is that it's non-theistic. He's saying, like, yeah, the gods are there. You still got to do your work.
The closer you are to the Theravada,
Yeah.
when you look at a historical regression, the theism comes much later.
Yeah.
And it's using offshoot of the Mahayana tradition.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of appreciate the middle ground where, it's still a Theravada point of view where you have heavenly realms, hill realms, and they got their problems. They're too busy to work on your shit, to work on your shit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Sorry for going 5 minutes over tonight. See you next week. Last, announcement. There's a couple of things coming up. There's a Against the Stream 7-day silent meditation retreat in October here in Southern California, up near Big Bear, up in the mountains. Registration is open for that. Please join us if you can. I'm working on raising some scholarship money. So a few people have been asking if they can come, even though they can't afford it. So I'm working on it, not yet, but I'm working on raising some money for scholarships. And everything that we do here, and our ability to be the vehicle, the raft, is from your support. We're a nonprofit organization. Obviously, we don't charge to come to the class on Zoom. We don't charge to walk in the door. And it's, supported by your generosity and your freely offered support of Against the Stream. And, our expenses are a few grand a month, to pay the rent and to pay the web person and to pay the social media person, and for there to be a little bit left over to pay me and support me in my teaching. It takes a bunch of money. So be as generous as you can be, and know that you're welcome here, if you're broke, don't worry, come, you're welcome to be here. If you're not broke, pitch in to keep this thing going and support it, and let us continue to exist. We've existed, I've been teaching this Monday night class on the west side of Los Angeles for 17 years, and we're still here. But it's because people keep helping. So do what you can. There's a bowl at the front desk for cash donations. There's a QR code for the PayPal or the Venmo donations. And thank you for your generosity. May any goodness that comes from our practice be shared outward in all directions with all living beings. May each one of us get as free as possible. And together, may we create a positive change on this planet.